Hey guys, so today in this video I'm going to be talking about the subject slash topic of attention. So I just kind of had this idea because I was thinking about like the loneliness epidemic and like communication and like attention, and I was realizing like nobodies or just like regular people usually get ignored a lot more compared to like famous people. And I realized that this basically it's like the internet. The problem is the internet is a very high value thing, and so people get attracted to it just like gravity. And so everyone's like staring at it and getting attracted to it, and they're forgetting the people around them. And I realize the famous people are just like that. Of course, they're way less valuable, right, compared to the whole internet. But and they're also a lot of what they do is superfluous. But a lot of people are attracted to the idea of becoming famous or being the best at something, and so people get attracted to their yeah to their like um I guess yeah to the yeah just to those famous people, and what they imagine like for themselves and the value they get out of it. And also people always like it when things are simplified, and so you always have that huge simplification with famous people. It's just like, oh, one person and they achieve this, and so it's a very simple thing, right? And it's accessible, right? It's very accessible with the internet. You can just like find famous people a lot more easily. You know, they maybe are like your favorite actors or your favorite sports players, um, or you know, people on the news like politicians, etc. And so because of that, like the other people around you, they're also accessible because they're like right, you know, next to you or in your environment. Um, but the problem is that it's the perceived value. Well, I don't know why am I using quotes? Okay, it's the perceived value, um, where you don't see the same. Well, you don't. You have your own perceived value of what you know those people, how valuable those people are. And usually it's like it kind of like just shows the fact that like people often like think about the value that they get from things, which is like super problematic because we forget, you know, it's like treat others how you would like to be treated. We basically forget that like you want to treat others the way you'd like to be treated, because otherwise everyone's going to do the same thing. And if everyone does the same thing, then you basically end up with a system where where a few people get way too much attention, like the famous people on the internet, and you know the lesser famous people on the internet. And then you have the people getting way too little attention, like the people who are seen as like you know, less valuable. So, you know, like people who are more like outcasted from society, and like minorities, and well, like, you know, just minorities who are also outcasted in society. Um, so yeah, and you like minority groups, just any types of groups in society. And yeah, and then you basically just get the serious problem of then you know have it even it's not like, oh, but the people who are, you know, in society and who are more of the status, more close, who are closer to the status quo, it's not like they're gonna just magically not have the problems. They'll also have the problems, just on a smaller scale. And I think it's like if you look at the group of sorry, the age group that's the loneliest, it's like from 16 to 24. And that's like all because like, you know, you're trying to figure stuff out in life. And so I think also there's it's not just the minorities and the like the outcasts, like the not just like any minorities, but like the minority outcasts or just the outcasts, or like the age groups too that matter. And so yeah, I think the age groups also matter. And So going back to the attention, there's I would say I'd break it down into two. Because we're social animals, we really care a lot about socializing with our own species. But then there's also the external um, attention uh, besides towards our own species. So there's the inwards and the outwards. So the inwards is towards our species, and the outwards is towards other species and other mineral life. So, like technology is an attention towards mineral life, like pets, nature, zoos is like attention towards nature and different species. Same with like hiking and so, and there's some that are like a little bit of a mix. Like, I mean, there's always a mix in there. Like, you're using your tools while you're doing it, and usually there's always a couple like trees in the area or some grass. But as for whether you value those things in the moment is a different story. But I'd say like also people sometimes they there's like culture, which is like a mix of the two because there's like the geography to it. Um, so there's that also. Um, but I would say a great example, another example of serious problem is that we're getting super detached from nature. We're not giving it enough attention, and we're completely, it's like we evolved to be in nature and to work alongside it and like live in it, and we're just completely ignoring that and giving our attention to technology because we're like, the high value of technology, even though at the very core of our brains we're like hardwired for nature and like interacting with it more, and also just evolutionary genetically, besides the brain, we're much more evolved to be used to surviving in nature, which is why like it's super bad for us to be shifting our attention towards technology so much so that we're completely destroying nature, and on top of that, that we don't even realize how important nature is, because it's like the person who sees the ant and they're like, that thing's not important, and then they just crush it, except that ant is like nature. Now of course it's not to that extent where we literally think our nature is like an ant, but you can imagine like it gets to a point where it's something like somewhat similar, and people are just like, technology is so awesome. There's no way technology can't solve all the problems. And nature is just this chaotic thing anyway. Um, so I don't know. I just feel like it's the attention, and attention um, goes down, really gets to like a big important aspect, which is the idea of you care about what you know, like you are what you learn. And I always say it's like you're like a shell, and whatever data goes inside you is what you care about, because you only care about what's directly in the shell. Your shell and what's directly in it, that's what you care about. Um, so because every person only cares about what's in the shell and what's the shell and what's directly in it, because you can't know something. Sorry, you can't care about something you don't know, and you can't act on something you don't know. Hence, you're basically always going to be acting on only what you know, and you're only going to be caring about only what you know. So it's like if there's something that's supposed to motivate you, you have to know it. If there's something you're supposed to like um, you're supposed to react to, you're supposed to work on, you have to know it. And so a lot of the time the problem is with the attention. You're basically, when you use the attention, you're forcing people. Well, you're not forcing, but you're manipulating how people care, like what things people care about, how much they care about those things, and also what things people act on. Basically, just manipulating what people know. And that's like everything. That's like literally your whole identity is what you know. Your whole identity is what you know. And that's what attention manipulates. That's why like the marketing industry and the whole like internet industry and those other aspects to it, like the internet, the camera industry, like just photography, filmmaking are like super big industries. They're tied to like education, like YouTube and other, big famous like softwares, um, like, TikTok, Facebook, all of those, same thing. That's all about attention. And of course, there's other aspects to it, but attention is a big one. And like I said, it's basically how you manipulate the flow of knowledge, and knowledge is what makes you. Like, that's your whole identity is the physical, and yet once as you have the physical, then it's mostly just the knowledge. It's like the mental and the physical, right? Um, those are the two big aspects. So of course, this is also super problematic because when you look at our society, you have these people who are given like much less attention, so they get like much less help, or they feel very isolated. Um, and there's also lack of community. There's a huge lack of community, a huge lack of like teamwork in society. That's like starting to, it's like the individualism. Like in the U.S., there's strong individualism, so that's another aspect to it. It's like the individualism is basically attention for yourself. Too much attention to yourself, not enough attention outwards. Even though there's way more out there than there is in you. And so yeah, and I guess as for how it relates to the framework, the balance aspect, right? The attention. I would say, like, for instance, that there's a more of an objective sort of outlook that you could have, and a much more subjective one. And the subjective one can usually be the most problematic. Well, yeah, it's usually the most problematic. Well, it's maybe always the most problematic. Just because, I mean, you have to be subjective to a certain extent, um, as humans. But yeah, like basically what happens is because you're super subjective, you're just gonna stick to like the ideas, and you're gonna be less open-minded. Whereas if you're objective and you know a lot more, then you're more likely to realize the problems and to understand how the universe works. And maybe, I guess, like, as long as you understand a couple topics, including like this one, and you also understand like the importance of like objectivity and an open mind, those types of things, then you start to realize like how important like diversity of thoughts and knowledge is, aka balance. Um, so like one aspect of balance, there's also change. So either you're stuck in like what and you're like way too close-minded. Your attention is too much inwards instead of outwards, or you're stuck physically, like maybe you don't like experiment enough things, or you're stuck mentally, so physically or mentally. Maybe mentally you're scared, you're like paralyzed to try new things. That could be a serious problem. So that's like with change, like the fear of change and trying new things, because then you're not going to get that diversity you need uh, in your shell, filling your shell with diversity. So it's going to be less resilient, just like nature. Nature is much more resilient because of the diversity. Um, you also have the aspect of the justice, basically rules. So of course, there's like the hard justices of nature, of like the universe, and nature is all about rules. So in terms of attention relating to rules, I would say, I mean, a good example is the idea of like status quo. Status quo, we always fixate so much on status quo because people are like, oh, these are the rules. This is what it's important. So it's like when people are saying like this thing is important, then you're just like, oh, you take it like super seriously. I guess it's like the credibility to it. That's like for rules. And then there's also the general topic of like justice, like ethics. And in that sense, you could say like there's also a serious problem in society where people don't think about ethics as much, and that has a lot to do with consequences. So consequences are often ignored a lot. Requirements are less ignored because you can't do anything like without the requirements, but the consequences a lot of the time are completely ignored because they come after and you're just like, oh, I want this thing. And so you're just like, I want this thing. You're fixating on this. The attention's here. And you had to, put in some level of attention for the requirements, even though with our growing specialization in society, less and less people have to even focus on this. They can only focus on if they want, they could focus on parts of the requirements, like 10%, 20%, 50%, and the other 50% or more, they just completely ignore. Um, and then there's the consequences, and those are even more ignored. Um, and so it's just completely, that's again, it relates to the attention. Then you also have the capability. So as for how the capability, like I said, breaks down to mental and physical. And yeah, so I already kind of talked about that quite a bit on how that relates to the attention. There's also the attention physically. The physical attention is more of like your physical location in space, and how you're like grounded, and what your literal environment is, because your literal physical environment is going to affect you a lot. Of course, you have your internal environment in your head, but you also have your physical environment around you, and that's going to affect what things pop into your head. So yeah, and then you have the last one, which would be the dimensions, so space and time. And so, of course, another big problem is short attention spans. So where our attentions nowadays are becoming shorter and shorter. So that's a serious problem. And then you also have the space. So again, that's like the hyper focus, like, right, like instead of much more balanced and broad. I mean, we also do, like, there are also, for instance, a lot of people who are like who do have a broad attention span, like attention to things. The problem is it's like way too broad. It's like super distracted. uh there's not even like, I guess going back to the justice of like rules, I think it's important to have those priorities of attention. Like, this is important, this is not important, this is important, this is not important. And the problem is sometimes for a lot of people, I mean, they say that like they have their priorities, and they do have their priorities, because they literally, there's other things um, they don't pay attention to. So it's not like people don't have priorities. I think the main problem is that they usually it's that they don't have like ones that um are like, like that are actually like important, like in terms of like what's really important. um it's just what's perceived as like important, but it's not like what is important, logically, ethically, etc. um and so there's that aspect to it. And so yeah, so you have that the timing of the attention. It's like it's getting shorter and shorter. You want it to be longer, right? Like, think before you act, those types of things. Also, just, you have to invest in things. You get what you put in. You have to invest. Change is effort times time. If you're not willing to put in the time and the attention towards something for longer periods of time, then you're gonna only be able to make very small amounts of change, and you're gonna quit a lot of things and just be, switching to all sorts of different tasks, and you're never gonna be able to accomplish like difficult things. And in the spacing, again, that was like the focusing and the environment. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say about the attention. And like I said, just a quick summary. Well, not summary, full summary, but the last reminder. Like I was saying, it's super important. You are what you know. And so attention is like the complete um, navigation slash, yeah, the navigation slash manipulation of what you know, like what you want to feed into yourself and to feed into your identity and what makes you you. Hence, it's super important as a topic, attention. And yeah, I think it's just really important to remember that. So yeah, so hope you like the video, guys. If you want to see more like this, videos like this, I make a bunch of them all the time, so you can check those out, and I'll see you guys in the next one.